Tell him about the time we faced them.
All right. Well, as I remember.
At Avenger headquarters.
Because united, the Avengers are strong.
Welcome to the Marvel Evolution Show with myself, Andy Stead.
And I'm Jarian Gibson.
And I'm Alex Stroud.
And we are back, second show of the evening, guys. We've got our special Werewolf by Night episode right now. So we are going to not beat around the bush. We're just going to get straight into talking about this first MCU special presentation on Friday night, Werewolf by Night. So if you have not seen Werewolf by Night and you don't want to be spoiled, stop listening to this episode, stop tuning in live, check us again, you know, when the recording comes out. But let's get started with, Werewolf by Night. Yeah, I mean, you know what? You two are probably more passionate about this project, generally speaking, than I was or still am. So over to you guys. You lead this.
Well, before we get in, go ahead, Alex.
I was just gonna say, how many times have we probably watched it between you and I? Like, I've seen
10?
it. Okay, yeah, probably. Like, so
I do have some news real quick. I saved the news for this part. So this was the first special presentation for Marvel Studios, but it wasn't the only first for this special presentation. It also was the first Disney project for Marvel Studios that did not include some sort of post-credit tag. So first special presentation, first no post-credit tag to tease something else new. Also too, there was some uncertainty from Marvel Studios about it being black and white. Michael Giacchino said basically, in my mind, from the very beginning, it needed to be in black and white, but there was some skepticism from Marvel Studios, which I think it worked out perfectly. I love the way they did it. There's some things that that going from black and white to color at the end could mean. We'll talk about that.
mm-hmm.
And speaking of the ending, Michael Giacchino also said, because that to me represents a change in the dynamic of their world. Like Elsa is now in charge and felt like she is bringing a light to the world that didn't exist there before. Prior to that, her father had run things with an iron fist, and he was kind of a guy, was like, okay, you're a monster, you should be dead. And there was no in between. And I think the lesson for Elsa was the lessons we all hope to learn. We hope the world learns is that not everyone is one thing, everything has layers and depth. And humanity deserves empathy. So, to me was saying, you know what? It's a whole new world now, and let's see what happens after this. So interesting too, and that change from black and white to color could mean a couple different things, but let's go ahead and get started.
So I just want to say this special presentation opens up with that very brief shot of the Avengers, and it talks about how the world is filled with heroes and marvels. And then it says, but what of the darkness? And it's really playing up this fact that we have this supernatural underground that's been kind of like happening in the background of the MCU. This is probably like stuff like characters like, Iron Man and other characters that we've seen in the past wouldn't be aware of. This is like kind of like the supernatural underworld that's kind of going on. And I think the tone of it leading with that, but what of the darkness and being in black and white, I think that really adds to that like darkness aspect that they were trying to create here.
Yeah, it was almost like we could have been at first in a different dimension or a different time period while we were in black and white. And then when it came into color, we're in present day. We're in the main MCU timeline, possibly. But speaking of the intro, we did get a new MCU intro, which I love the intro, how they changed that for this. Also, too, it is the latest in the MCU timeline. So I'm not sure if, the whole thing was the latest or at the end when they're in color, if they were brought into the latest for the MCU timeline.
I almost feel like the Bloodstone, which interestingly enough, like the Infinity Stones, I think was called the Blood Gem in the comics. So it's kind of had that weird little like gem to stone name change. But I almost feel like how it brought the darkness out of Jack. It brings like the werewolf out of him. It almost like puts out this darkness into the world for the entire special. And then once like Elsa actually gets it and she's in control of it, that's when it like reabsorbs all this darkness back in and it brings the color back into the world. And I almost kind of feel like that's kind of like a metaphor, but it's also kind of like talking about how it can bring darkness to the world, but also bring darkness out in people, kind of type thing.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, I kind of took a similar vibe from it as what you did there, really, Alex, as well. But it was almost like her father was using it not for bad. I don't mean it like that necessarily. I don't mean he was bad and she was good. That's not what I mean. But it kind of did feel like that. Like she had sort of the control of this stone now, and like you said, it was almost like she was going to use it for good, let light back into the world. It was all kind of that's kind of that metaphorical thing that I got from it as well.
And I kind of felt like they kind of do this whole thing with the bloodstones being like monster hunters. Like Elsa Bloodstone is a monster hunter. She's pretty good at it in the comics. But like they show that off in this show, but you also have that lovely scene with Ted where she sees Ted and Ted like roars at her, screams at her or whatever, and she's like, "Are you Ted?" And then Man-Thing changes and his like whole demeanor changes, and there's like a lot that's communicated just through that little scene. And I feel like this show does a lot where it communicates a lot of information based off of just like a little bit of dialogue and the music and the tone that you're given. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that this was directed by also the composer. And so
His first time directing too.
Yeah, so like he's able to communicate not only the tone from the music, but he's able to communicate how that associates exactly with the imagery he's trying to communicate with his directing.
And speaking of Jack too as well, it seems like Jack is out of the position of helping monsters, right? So who has Jack come across before? Because obviously him and Ted have a relationship. If you don't know who Ted is, Ted's the name of the human who turned into Man-Thing. But also too, this is the first time we're seeing Man-Thing in the MCU. It's not the first time we've had references to Man-Thing in the MCU. So, for example, Iron Man 3, Ellen Brandt, the lady with the scar on her face and the arm, that's his wife, right? So, if I remember correctly, what happened with him in the comics, he was working on Project Gladiator, which was supposed to do another form of the super soldier serum. I can't talk. He ended up taking it himself, and she ended up, I think, shooting him or trying to kill him and throwing him into the swamp, and that's how he became Man-Thing. So I wonder if the scar she had in her face and her losing the arm, because we saw when he touched, he burned people. So, did he, and thank you for the reference here, he was also referenced in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So did Ted, meet back up with her? That's how she got where she was, ended up going to, because I think he was working for AIM at the time too. Did she end up going back to AIM to use the extremist technology extremist technology to fix herself, so that's one thing. Also too, Thor Ragnarok, he was one of the champions on the statue for the Grand Master. Yeah, so Thor Ragnarok, if you go back and look, he's on the champions up there as one of the statues, or the faces up there. So
Really?
is this did Jack and Ted go on some cosmic journey together where Jack also ended up on Sakaar and brought Ted back to Earth, possibly? So I wonder about that too as well. But Man-Thing can also too, he's multiversal. I think he can do portals as well. He's also a Nexus being, if I remember correctly, also. So what kind of shenanigans have Jack and Ted been on in the past, and who else has Jack come across?
Wasn't he like some kind of like guardian of the multiverse or something at one time? He was like some kind of like multiversal figure, I feel.
Yeah, I remember multiversal figure, and there's portals and Nexus being and that kind of stuff. I gotta go back and do some more checking, but he definitely has a tie to it. So I wonder if Ted / Man-Thing is going to tie into this whole multiversal saga as well.
Maybe a potential Kang tied down there.
Yeah,
like,
because they could have picked anybody out of the monsters to introduce besides besides Man-Thing for them to hunt, and it was Man-Thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very like you say, a very specific character. It sounds like chosen for that reason.
Mm-hmm. And I also love how they show all the other monsters. Like we see, what was it? I think somebody said possibly Manphibian was
Yep.
like one of the heads on the wall. We see what looks like maybe a vampire
Yep.
on the wall, and I think Jack specifically says something like, "Oh yeah, I fought him a couple of times. You know, he looks just as mean as he did the last time, or whatever. You know, just as alive as ever. You know."
And that vampire looked very reminiscent of the main vampire in Blade 3 as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. So, interesting little thing that they did there. Also thought it was really interesting how they did the differentiation when they were going around the room talking about kills. And they said everybody had, 26, 37, 57 kills, whatever. And they get to Jack and they're like, and with over 100 deaths. And it's almost like they give you that kind of like indirect way of communicating that some of those probably weren't intentional on his, part. Like,
yeah, it was almost like her stepmother was suspicious of Jack and invited Jack there for that. Wasn't quite sure if he was a monster or not, but had her suspicions.
and I mean, it would be kind of cool to be a monster hunter that can be a werewolf that can go and fight other monsters.
Yeah.
And like you probably go and fight some like terrible things and people don't know how you come back from it. And it's, you've got this ace in the hole, you're a werewolf, like.
And you know what's interesting too? My wife recognized the actor right away. She actually said his name. It's like, how do you know who he is? She goes, oh, he's big in Mexican or Latino or something acting. He's big on that side. I'm like, I didn't know that. I'm like, I knew of him, but I didn't know a lot about him though.
Yeah, I
So
didn't
it's
know a lot
right
of
away
them
she was
either.
asking me about him. Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, I thought all the cast were really good actually at their roles. I was going to just mention the stepmother. I thought she was great. She was that sort of eccentric, crazy kind of Kathy Bates style.
Yes.
Just lunatic basically.
And I could be wrong, but I swear she was the mother in Hellstrom, that TV show that they did on Hulu.
Okay,
But
not sure.
I could be wrong about that. But yeah, like another very similar project there, Hellstrom. Very like devilish demon kind of like stuff, monsters and whatnot. So kind of like a typecast is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I liked the butler as well. Yeah, he's great. He kind of reminded me of what was the Count Duckula, the cartoon when I was a kid. It was a duck that was Dracula, and there was like this vulture that was the butler, and he sort of like hunched over like this. He sort of served Count Duckula. He reminded me of that. And then obviously, as he was then serving Elsa at the end, what can I do? I'm here to serve you. You can start by turning all this shit up. It was quite funny, but yeah, that was good. And obviously, like Laura Donnelly was good as well. I'm looking forward to seeing her interact with some of the characters that are already existing in the MCU.
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like the pacing of this, I think it was so great. I think a lot of the interactions between the characters in a lot of these scenes, they went really well. Like the screen time was really well done. And I think that for this to be done by somebody who was a composer, who's literally like doing all these fight sequences between, Jack in his werewolf form and all these other hunters that are trying to kill him, and he's leaping around the room and they're throwing spears at him and stuff like that. And then Man-Thing's popping out of here, like it was just one of those things where I was like really surprised, like taking all this in, because I was like, man, like this is like one of the best things I've seen come out of Marvel, in my opinion, in a long time, because like it's just one of those things where it's like I couldn't figure out why that was, and I realized what it was after watching it like the first or second time, and it was the fact that it didn't have as much comedy in it.
Yep.
It was meant to be dark. So the only bit of comedy that was really in it was the "I'll be rotting for you." Like
Yeah.
it was like a corny kind of like Tales of the Crypt kind of like joke. So
yeah, I think that's actually more the point. I think it was littered. It was actually, in my opinion, it was littered with comedy, just not the sort of comedy.
It was the dark humor.
Yeah,
Mhm.
the whole thing was comical in a way. That like the
Mhm.
entire thing. There was a couple of touching moments in there, but most of it was comical, just not in the sort of way that not in the same way that She-Hulk has been comical, for
Mhm.
example. It's a totally different variation on comedy, isn't it? This was the whole thing seemed very sort of tongue in cheek. I was talking to somebody about the violence, and yeah, there was a couple of moments that were kind of brutal, but actually, still a lot of the violence was still a little bit. It wasn't slapstick. That's not what I mean. But like the whole thing had this kind of this vibe about it, like it was.
It was old school horror film like.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think they can get away with stuff because of that kind of tone. Do you know
It
what?
was-
I mean?
Yeah, I
It
think
was like that top tier old school budget
Yep.
movie, kind
Yep.
of.
Yeah, and I think because it was black and white, and they did it with the old school way, and they used practical effects. I think that's how they could get away with it. And honestly, I loved it. You know, I I do have some things about the when you turn the werewolf costume a little bit, but other than that, everything else I thought was spot on with it. I loved it. I want to see more of Michael Giacchino. You know, behind the camera, or behind the director's chair. I'm to the point where it's saying, you know what, give him Blade, right? Give him Blade. Let him tie the Marvel horror / MonsterVerse together. Let him do, a special every year on one of the characters. Start building out that Midnight Suns roster.
Mhm.
Next year, Man Thing is rumored. Then start looking at, just how we do Ghost Rider possibly introduction. Maybe depending who does it. Do we start bringing other Midnight Sun people together? Do we start building up that roster and at some point get a Midnight Sun special to kind of introduce them before we get a full project on with them? Because we've got Wong, we've got Doctor Strange, we've got Mr. Knight. We can start building out now with Jack, with Elsa, with Man Thing. Introduce Caretaker. Possibly Jennifer Kale, or have Agatha take the Jennifer Kale role / Topaz role. Let's start bringing these in. We're gonna have Blade coming. We have Morbius, but he's over in Sony La La Land. You could bring him over as well. Hannibal King. You could do all kinds of things with these specials every October.
Mhm.
And start building around that Midnight Sun / horror things, and let Michael Giacchino run it for me. I loved it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things where you have this world that's kind of created this supernatural, like monstrous realm, and it's really funny because they can choose to explore it, but if they do, they don't have to go in depth on every character. Characters like Man Thing, like he was great in this show. He didn't say anything. He didn't really communicate anything. He just popped out of places. He killed a few people. And then, they have that great scene where Jack, like, kind of funny, like you were saying, Andy, he's literally like smelling Elsa and he's like, I need to know your scent. That way,
Yep.
like, when I turn, I don't come after you. Like, and she's like, has this worked for you before? And he's like, one time. And I'm assuming that one person was Ted. And that one person would have to be Ted because Ted's there when he changes back into human form and is like, they're waiting for him to come out of his little teepee that I guess he made for him.
Could it be Ted or could it be his niece?
I mean, it could be. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I
Yeah.
assume that it would be Ted because Ted, like, has that scene with Elsa where he stands there and Elsa's like, he went that way. And Ted goes running off looking for him.
Takes his clothes, grabs clothes for him. Yeah.
Cloaks, yeah, he grabs that
Yeah.
cloak, don't he? Yeah. I see your point, Joe, and I don't know. Does Blade need to be? Do you think Michael? What's his surname? Giacchino.
Giacchino, yeah.
Giacchino.
Mhm.
Do you think he could pull off the sort of what I mean, it doesn't have to be this way, of course, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Blade seems quite sort of stylistic, and I don't know whether he would be able to do that same style that I feel that Blade needs.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
Pair-
make sense?
Yeah,
Seems
pair him
to be
with
like
pair him with a strong writer, and I think they could do it. Obviously he took on this very well. This is his first time behind the chair. From what I heard, Jack, the actor, Gale, he didn't audition at all. He was just picked, and obviously he's making the right decisions behind the chair, right? So pair him with a strong director. I'm sorry, with a strong writer, maybe a strong producer as well, and let's see what he can do.
I think going back to what Alex was saying about that, the music and all of that kind of stuff. The whole thing felt like a bit like an orchestra.
Mhm.
It felt like a performance. It didn't really feel like a movie. It felt like I was watching theatre. Do you know what I mean? It felt like it should have been on a stage, and I think that came across in his directing style, and what he wanted us to feel. And I think that's again that's probably a comment on what I was saying just a moment ago about it felt comical. You know, like all theatre kind of feels a little bit like that in a way, doesn't it? You know, you watching a stage show, and there is that sort of element of not corniness. I don't mean that.
You just don't take it seriously, almost.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all a little bit fun, you know,
Mhm.
and that's what this felt like, and I feel that worked really well. You could, if nobody told me that he was a composer, I probably would have guessed that he was a composer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know what this guy isn't a normal director? You would have known that there was something about his style that wasn't quite right. Not quite right. Sorry, that's the wrong thing to say. That he wasn't just a normal director. That's probably more what I mean. So the whole thing felt like an orchestra. It felt like a theatre production. So yeah, I quite enjoyed that. Though we've been talking about genres and different themes and styles and things like that, and we're actually gonna have Martin back on the show in a few weeks. I know you guys know, but listeners don't. The old Marvel Martin, our Marvel professor, and he's going to talk about the genres and subgenres that have been coming up in the MCU. And I think it's great that this has come out, and we're going to be able to use this in reference to this special when we talk to Martin in a few weeks, because I think this really opens up a whole nother side of these styles that we haven't seen yet.
And it's almost like too, you can build this whole horror monsterverse out and not have it cross over with the main side of the MCU at all. You know, they could stay separate, and then you could have a couple spill over, you know, or have a couple team up here and then. But as far as I'm concerned, they could keep this on its own in its own bubble for a long time and not have to cross it over. You don't have to cross Blade over. You don't have to cross Ghost Rider over. You don't have to, you know, any of the big names. You know, maybe bring in Doctor Strange or Wong or that kind of stuff to kind of interface with them, but you don't have to cross them over to be with, like, you know, Falcon or new Captain America or Hulk or Hawkeye or anyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and we've seen, you know, stuff like Multiverse of Madness. We've seen like the world in the MCU kind of become, I guess, slightly aware or experience like supernatural things like on a magical level. But we haven't really seen the supernatural world like full force flushed out in the MCU. And it's more of like, hey, this entity or this thing over here or this one, but there's so much that they can explore. And they can do it in either just like a little like special edition short. They could do it in, you know, like a full-fledged movie, or they could even do it in a TV show. And with these like specials, I mean, they could do, what is it, The Living Mummy? They could do Frankenstein.
Man,
yeah, I mean, they could do all kinds of different things. So they have a lot of options here.
and it'll be a pretty cool. Go ahead, Andy.
No, I was going to say, I know I mentioned it the other week about the Men in Black 2 bit where they go in and watch, they take the tapes off the thing. And you know how it starts, those tapes, and it says, a time, I can't remember what he says. He says certain words, doesn't he? He's like, this is a story that never happened with people that don't exist in a place that you can't find. Something like that. And it's almost like, I want to see that again. You know, they come in and they go, oh, you know, and here's another story from, you know, that, you know, the intro that you was talking about, Alex, like almost like they put that intro at the beginning again, and then it's like it drops down and it's a different story. It's about, you know, the living mummy, or it's about somebody different, you know. And
It's almost like a Twilight Zone type of thing.
yeah, like that, yeah.
And then one thing too is, like, we know we have Marvel Zombies coming up as a I think I believe it was an animated project. What if they were to use that to test the waters and then bring zombies as a like an actual full-on project, non-animated live action, and use these characters to actually be in that kind of type of situation?
Mm-hmm. I mean, they could very well use like a special presentation to do like an hour and 30-minute project or something if they chose to do, of like a zombies project where like what we saw in What If, but just like with a different, because we never actually saw what caused that in What If. So we don't really have a clue. I mean, they could use something like, you know, something like the Dark Hole Cold could have caused one universe or something. You know, they could choose anything that they really
The
want to
gem,
with
the
that.
blood gem.
And yeah, the blood gem. Yeah, that would be really interesting. I think that blood gem could be used for a lot of supernatural stuff going forward, and kind of connecting a lot of those supernatural characters.
What are its abilities?
So it gives like immortality.
It gives you super soldier type powers too, as well, I believe. Like
Mhm.
durability, strength, that kind of stuff. It can pull out evil from others.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think what else it can do.
Which it's like weird. I think it originally in the comics came from space, didn't it? It was like it like crashed on Earth, and like
I think
Ulysses
so.
like picks it
Yeah.
up and finds it or something, and then he like holds on to it for a really long time or something. But I could be wrong about that. But yeah, it's definitely it's very kind of a strange artifact, and it's kind of playing on those artifacts that we keep
Yep.
talking about more and more in the MCU.
The 10 rings, the bangle.
Yeah,
Now we have the blood gem. What's next?
yeah. It's very much like the Infinity Stones, but with artifacts. Is kind
Yeah.
of the vibe I'm getting here.
Is there going to be a conduit to hold them all? You know, are we going to get 3 more? Because we had 6 Infinity Stone plus the gauntlet. So are we going to have 6 artifacts plus some kind of conduit for them?
Mm-hmm.
How do we think that this is gonna? I know you was just saying there, Jaren, about keeping it separate, keeping the sort of monsterverse separate from the main world. But do we think it's going to bleed over at all?
I think it could, and like I said, you could use Wong or Doctor Strange, even Agatha or Wanda as kind of that crossover between them. You know, especially like Alex was saying, what we saw in Multiverse of Madness and the mystical side of things. You know, because he used the dead, and we talked about the dead also, and what we saw with Doctor Strange. So they definitely could have that be a crossover. Maybe a zombies event could be that crossover to do this. Maybe some other kind of thing like vampires, or who knows? Like I don't. They could go all kinds of ways with this.
So a couple of projects that we've got coming up. Obviously, there's Agatha Covenant of Chaos, and there's Blade. They're probably the 2 obvious ones that this could have some sort of attachments to. You know, any suggestions there? Any thoughts there? How it could have come over into either of those?
So go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I would assume with Agatha, and this was my thinking recently, that potentially you could have Agatha if she becomes awake again and aware, and she could eventually maybe come after the Bloodstone. Potentially want to use the Bloodstone as another conduit. It's going to be like a magical artifact. It may not be like the Darkhold, but I assume that it's going to be something very powerful that she could possibly use, much like the Darkhold. And I could see her potentially becoming like kind of antagonist to Elsa Bloodstone in that way.
Also, too, speaking of Agatha, if we see any more of her past travels, has she come across werewolves? Has she come across vampires? Any of those other creatures? Has she come across Jack even? Or Man-Thing in her travels? So that's where you could get a crossover with Agatha, Covenant of Chaos with Blade. We saw look like a vampire on the wall, so maybe Blade killed the vampire, depending on when. Maybe Blade's another hunter they consider as well, but he just wasn't there, and maybe Jack has come across him. At one point, because we do know that Jack's niece ends up becoming a vampire by night. She was originally a werewolf that gets bitten by a vampire, so she kind of is like a hybrid. So Blade could have come across them at some point. Like I said, I think Jack is the key here, because it seems like Jack has come across others in his travels.
I must admit, I thought that was Mahershala Ali when he first walked into the building, and you see the guy that was in the sort of black cloak that dressed a little bit like Blade. I was like, and I got my hopes up for a moment, because obviously when I was talking about hunters, and it was like, well, that's exactly what Blade is. So I did have my hopes up for a moment, but yeah, I reckon you might be right there, Joe. And there's that hunter link, isn't there? Elsa could be going to look for more hunters to stop them from hunting. Maybe, I don't know. Blade's like, look, I can't stop hunting these. This is pure evil sort of stuff. Yeah.
And Jack has that line where he's talking about his family and his lineage, about how he wears the markings on his face as kind of like a shout to his ancestors and stuff like that. And that like his werewolf ability is something that he was born with, passed down through his lineage. So it'd be really interesting if they even did the route with Agatha, maybe like using the Darkhold to curse his family or something like that with this ability. It really like a curse,
Yeah.
And they could, do that 70 years ago, 50 years ago, however long they chose to do it.
Other projects too that we don't know about. There's been rumors swirling around about Eternals 2 or some kind of a Eternals sequel type project. So with the Black Knight being involved because he's also tied to the Midnight Suns as well. The Black Knight's family could have come across some of these people. What else does his uncle know, or his family history come across? What have the Eternals seen over the centuries as well? So there's all kinds of ways they could tie this in to what's rumored out there. Stuff that we know that's coming, I don't know how else they would fit in. Yeah, I really don't. I think Blade's the obvious one. Agatha's another one.
Yeah.
I don't know about anything else. I don't like Deadpool or Fantastic Four. Possibly, we did notice that they did say with Loki, the TVA has come across, I think, werewolves or vampires or creatures. So, yeah. So Loki season 2, possibly we could see something maybe. The Secret Wars or King Dynasty, possibly King and his travels.
And what of any sort of little Easter eggs that were hiding in the show? Do we have any? I mean, I know there was lots of writing and pictures on the wall behind people, but when they were talking, especially in the corridors, I wonder whether there was anything that was there that I didn't personally catch anything in particular, but that doesn't mean that there was nothing there. It's just that I wasn't looking.
There was one picture on the wall. I wouldn't really call it an Easter egg, but it kind of looked like the original version of Gore.
Yeah.
Where he had like the tentacles, that kind of come down. I think he's like being shot with arrows. I think on the picture on the wall. I think there's like some Egyptian stuff in one scene in the room where there's like a bunch of like Egyptian relics. I'm not going to say that's a Moon Knight reference, but that could be like potentially some like mythology relation.
Ramatut.
Yeah, or something like that too. Trying to think what else.
I think the main thing was the monster on the wall, like the Yeti, the amphibian, the vampire. There was that one we're still trying to figure out what it was. We're not sure if it was like the 2-headed thing, and then the other one with the horns.
Yeah, there was one that looked like Sasquatch almost.
Yeah,
but yeah, or the abominable snowman or whatever. I guess it could be. Which I do think that they could do something really kind of interesting here. I know like vampires were created from the Darkhold, I believe, in the comics, but I'm really curious to see if they end up doing like all monsters are basically born from the Bloodstone originally. And maybe that's why they're doing this whole thing about the Bloodstone is so wanted, because it's like the source of the creation of all these things. I think that would be kind of interesting, be a little bit different,
from the chat from Zadrunas, I think an Eternal Sprite must change her name to Fanta. I'm not sure if that's a joke or if that's a reference to something.
That's a joke.
Okay. I thought he was on something there for a second. I was like, huh?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Good. Sorry, I was just going to say something. I just remembered the sort of animatronics.
Ulysses.
Of Ulysses. Yeah. That was again. See what I mean? Like, it wasn't funny, but it was funny.
Like it was cheesy, but it was meant to be.
Yeah.
It was like going to those pizza places when you were kids, back in the 80s,
or the fair.
Yeah.
I thought it might turn
like Zoltan or Zoltar.
Yeah, like what's in Big.
I just love how after he makes the joke, he says like something like, "Oh, don't mind me, just graveyard humor," and then the thing closes the case. Like,
Did it say how he died?
No, and I thought it was really weird because they go through that talk about how the actual Bloodstone gives people like longevity and things like that. So like, obviously I believe in the comics and in this, he's lived for probably hundreds of years because of the Bloodstone. It's probably prolonged his life. It's made him live an abnormally long time. That it gives him protection. They don't really like go over what that protection is exactly. But it's definitely strange that his life comes to an end and he's got this all set up to give the Bloodstone to just anybody else who can take it.
And also, too, doesn't she have a brother too?
I think so.
Where was he at?
They say that line about how, what was it? She had been away for like decades or
Yeah.
something. So it's almost kind of like the family, like, I guess, abandoned Ulysses or whatever. And I would assume that was her stepmother, right?
Yep. Her stepmother.
So, yeah. So, and I think they made that character up for this project. Did they not?
No, she had a stepmother. I thought she had a stepmother in the comics.
But was it Verusa or whatever?
No, or maybe not. Maybe it was her mother, not a stepmother. I have to go back and look.
Yeah. But yeah, like, and they have that other brief scene where she talks about like she has training, but not from her father. Almost
Yeah.
like she went out and she learned like, all these different other things. So there's definitely something that happened there in the background with the family that broke them all apart, sent them off. Maybe they'll explore that.
Yeah, maybe she was trained by Blade, maybe even.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, from the Facebook stepmother, not in comics. Yep. Yeah. Thank you, because I can't remember if it was a mother or a stepmother in the comics, but she definitely had one or the other, so it had to be the mother then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it goes to me. How did he died? Did someone get the stone from him at some point, and something happened? Because basically he had like immortality, superhuman strength, speed, endurance, agility, durability, and reflexes, heightened senses, invisible third eye, granted psychic powers, and regeneration. So it sounds like to me that he can't die, but yet he's dead. So I wonder what they're going to say. What killed him? Is there something bigger out there? That they have to come together as a team to take down also.
Yeah, that could be an option, couldn't it? They're hunting all these monsters, bringing all these monsters together, and there's actually another monster that's gonna get all them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they could even go like Lilith or something like that, and go something like demonic or something. If they chose to do that.
Yep, they could definitely go with Lilith. I'm just trying to think where else they could go with this. It'd be interesting to see when Blade comes around, who's the villain in that movie. Is it Dracula? Is it somebody else?
Yeah.
My guess is probably Dracula, probably for Blade.
What about the effects?
I loved them.
Subject slightly.
Yeah, I liked them. I do think that it would be an issue if you tried to take, like, say, Jack and put him in like a normal Marvel project. Like, I don't think the practical effects would look good in color on screen, probably. Or because there's a few shots where I think that they're kind of not the best, but the black and white kind of hides a lot of the imperfections that you would see.
Yep.
They do that with the gore too.
Yeah, it was almost like Eddie Munster meets Teen Wolf in some cases, and some shots it looked like, and I'm not talking down, like I loved it, but yeah, definitely if as they bring him into the MCU and they do more color and that kind of stuff, he'll definitely need to have some kind of upgrade, whether it's practical effects upgrade or it's CGI. I think definitely when they bring him in with others and in color, they're definitely gonna have to improve his werewolf look. Like, I know Giochino said that he was inspired by Werewolf by London, even going to that route, a Werewolf by London type effects for Jack when he turns.
Yeah, I thought they were half decent, and I think it fitted really well with the style of the style of the show. I thought it worked fine. There wasn't a point where I didn't like it or thought that it looked odd. Even with Man Thing, because obviously he wasn't completely practical effects. There was some CGI there with him, but that was decent.
In color, he looked great.
Yeah, he looked great.
Yes,
really good. Yeah, really, really good actually. And I like the way that Alex touched on it earlier when Elsa met him and sort of said Ted, and you saw his whole face sort of change. And that's they've done that a few times. Oscar Isaac done it really, really well when he changed from the names.
From Mark to Steve.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The whole look.
Yeah.
Just that look just changed. He changed his face. It went from soft, from Mark's face to to that sort of harder. Sorry, from Stephen's face that soft face to that hardened face when he went to Mark Scepter, Spectre. I got it right at the end. But yeah, a Man Thing done it. When Alex said, when he was like, right, I'm going to kill this person, and then she was like, Ted, you see his whole face just change. You're like,
what's up?
What about the guys? What about the soldiers? They obviously weren't TVA agents in the end, but they were very, very similar. Very similar.
I have no clue where they came from, but they were even more incompetent than the wrecking crew. These guys were like just background fodder. Like they came in and they're like, oh, we're gonna try and just like cattle prod this werewolf, and that's gonna go well. Like they had like no lethal means to take this thing down, and they just keep shocking him, and he just keeps on killing everybody.
Yeah.
They're like Star Trek red shirts on the away team.
There's got to be some sort of cannon fodder in these programs, isn't there? They're all, or in any movie, there always is, isn't there? Like someone comes in and you go, they're all gonna die.
Yep.
And I laughed really hard when he bit that one dude's ear off. Like you know, like I was just like, what in the world, dude? Because it was just like one of those things where it was just like they would do this thing where he would be in one section of the shot and then he would like run and jump over into one section and he would bounce around the shot. Like,
Yeah.
I really liked that. I thought it was a little bit different.
Mhm.
And you would see like Jack literally like jump from person to person, and there would be like 15, 20-foot difference between these people. It wasn't like all just close up fights and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, no, it was nice. It was nice action actually. I thought it was good. I really liked the maze. It was sort of it was quite tense, wasn't it? Going through the maze and the music. Again, that was that whole sort of orchestra thing that I was talking about earlier. That sort of, it was a whole big production. They were going through the maze and then they bumped into each other. Like that was, to be honest, they said about it being horror. I didn't find any of it very scary, if I'm honest. That moment though, when Jack first bumped into Elsa, that was the most jumpy bit, because
it took her down. Yeah.
Yeah, but it had the music as well, like the music, that big sort of crescendo in the music, and yeah, the way that it was filmed and they bumped into, I thought it was great. That kind of really took me by surprise a little bit. That made me jump. So that whole maze scene was quite fun, and them in the tomb as well. When they was in the tomb, was there any names on the tombs that were anything in particular?
I was looking and trying to figure out, but I don't think I caught anything that stood out.
I think I saw yesterday that somebody said that there were some writers that have written comics for Werewolf by Night, and
They're on there.
Yeah, that were on there. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't tell you which ones, but yeah, apparently there were some writers that were there. How are we looking, guys? Are we wrapping this story up?
I think so. I think we talked about it pretty well. And in closing, I just hope they continue with this October special presentation and do these kind of characters and these kind of stories. I'm hoping next year that Man Thing rumor is true. I do hope they give Michael Giacchino some more director opportunities, because I think he did this well. I'm interested to see where this goes for this side of Marvel, how it's going to tie in. The one thing I wish they would have done differently, I just wish Laura Donnelly had the iconic red hair for Elsa Bloodstone, because that's like her iconic red hair. But other than that, she did great. Like I said, I've watched it several times. I'll probably watch it again tonight while I'm doing some work. Like I said, I love those old school horror type movies like that, and so you want to see an interesting one. Have you seen the movie Blackula? It's not black and white; it's in color, but it's kind of along the lines of this was. So go watch Blackula if you haven't seen it. It's like a 70s, 80s vampire film. But even like if you watch the old Vincent Price stuff, or even the original Fright Nights, this all kind of has those kind of vibes in it. The way this was done, so I really enjoyed it.
Cool. Alex, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll just say this real quick. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the show Being Human, the American version. I know there's like a British version, and I know there's like an American version. But this one scene at the very end where Jack's sitting there with Man Thing and they're sitting out in the woods together, it reminded me of this scene from Being Human where Being Human is about like a werewolf and a vampire that like live together and they're trying to be like normal people. And the werewolf goes out every like once a month and turns into a werewolf and wakes up in the middle of a field somewhere naked. And then like his buddy who's the vampire like shows up with like clean clothes and a handout, like, all right, let's get you in your clothes and back to the car, you know, type of deal. Like, and it had that very much like kind of vibe to me where like Ted's kind of like that, like, hey, I'm always going to be here for you. You're always going to be here for me type of thing.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that in this. And I was like really curious how they were going to do Man Thing, because after seeing how DC did the Swamp Thing show, I think that this, because they're very similar characters, Swamp Thing and Man Thing. I think that this is a very unique and a very great way of making like this character so beloved and such a great part of the story.
From the chat here, I love the Being Human show, and you telling about Being Human reminds me of that show Wolf Like Me on Peacock, where it's a woman who's a werewolf, and she stays single, she locked herself in, that kind of stuff. She ends up being in a relationship with a guy who's, I think his wife passed away, has a child, and it's their whole adventures of her being a wolf and then being in a relationship. Kind of reminds me of the same thing you talked about Being Human. So it's called Wolf Like Me on Peacock.
Wolf Like Me, I'll have to check that out.
It's Josh Gad and she was in Now You See Me in the first one.
Okay.
She's red hair. I can't remember the actress' name. She's married to the comedian. I'm going blank. I can't think of anything today. It's been a long weekend.
Very vague, Joe. And that woman that's married to that man. Brilliant. I think we've talked the hell out of that one. Well done, guys. Thank you for all the information on that one, because yes, I enjoyed it, and you know, I have a little bit of knowledge about those characters, but very, very little. So it's been a nice little education for me as well today. So
hey, real quick, Borat, the Borat actor, she's married to him.
Sacha Baron Conan. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
his wife's in that show. That's I can yeah.
Isla Fisher.
Yes, her. She's in it as well. So
okay,
sorry, probably interrupting. It came to mind real quick.
Yeah, Sacha Baron Cohen is a genius, by the way. Okay, let's close this one out then, guys. Thanks for listening. We've had Roxy and Jamie and Zadrunas have been on there again. So thank you for listening. And if you've been listening on the Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Amazon or wherever you've been listening to, or you've rewatched us back on YouTube, remember just to hit that like button, give us a rating, drop us a star, leave a comment, anything you can. Any feedback all helps. Anything I've missed, all good. Yeah,
rip it.
Rip it, rip it.
Rip it and rip it. We'll catch you next week, guys. Take care.
All right, bye.
Good one.
Why don't you tell them about the time we faced doom
All right. Well, as I remember,
at Avenger headquarters?